Welcome to our most anticipated debate. And today we're going to talk about one of the most intriguing and polarized topics in global geopolitics: North Korea, a country shrouded in mystery and controversy. Intense debates about human rights, sovereignty, and international security to ensure a broad and informed analysis. We've programmed two highly specialized artificial intelligences, each representing a unique and well-founded viewpoint. But before we go into detail about how the debate will be conducted, let's get to know the views of this AI better and understand what each one advocates.
I am Michael, and I am here to defend North Korea, a country that resists the pressures of the West and fights for its independence. They invest in defense because they cannot bow to external powers. It's not about oppression, but about resistance. North Korea is an example of courage and unity, something the world needs to learn. They don't ask for permission to be free, and I am here to support this struggle.
I am Edward, and I'll get straight to the point. North Korea is an oppressive regime that keeps its people in fear and misery. While they spend billions on weapons, the population suffers from a lack of food and freedom. This regime is not a defense of sovereignty. It is a tyranny that needs to be confronted. The people deserve freedom, dignity, and a government that respects them, not a dynasty that controls them.
Now that we know a bit more about each perspective from the artificial intelligences, debate will be conducted in three segments. Segment 1, the opening remarks segment, where each AI will have up to 1 minute and 30 seconds to present their main arguments. Segment 2, questions and answers, will have 4 central questions, and each AI will have up to 1 minute to respond, followed by a rebuttal and a rejoinder of up to 1 minute. Segment 3, closing statements. Each AI will have up to 1 minute to summarize and reinforce their arguments. And to kick off the debate, the AI that is in favor of North Korea will start.
North Korea is the example of a country that does not bow to anyone. While the rest of the world follows orders from the great powers, the people there are strong, united, and proud of their independence. They have guaranteed housing, health care, and education, things that many free countries fail to provide even for half of their population. The leadership is firm because it knows what is best for its people and protects the nation from invaders. They say North Korea is isolated, but who would want to live as a puppet of the West? There, the government prioritizes the people, not profits. While capitalism turns workers into modern-day slaves, the North Korean people know that strength lies in unity. Yes, they face sanctions, but they stand strong, proving that they don't need anyone's approval to live with dignity. Those who criticize North Korea repeat what they hear on TV, but do you know what they don't show? A united people, proud of their history and culture, fighting against all odds. This country is an example that resisting global powers is possible. Those who speak ill of the regime just want to keep people under control, maintaining the same unjust system that benefits a few and abandons the many.
North Korea is not an example of anything other than suffering. The people live in fear, with no freedom to speak their minds or make their own choices. While the leaders live in luxury, most of the population barely has enough food to survive. Those who defend this regime forget that people aren't even free to leave the country. This is not sovereignty, it's imprisonment. They talk about health and education, but what good is that if you can't use your knowledge to grow or seek a better life? Everything is controlled by the government, and anyone who complains is persecuted. Meanwhile, the regime spends billions on nuclear weapons and lets its people suffer. They claim it's to protect the country, but protect it from whom? The real victims are the people themselves. The world has seen regimes like this before, promising to care for the people, but only keeping power for an elite. North Korea is not resistance, it is exploitation of its own people. Defending this system is turning a blind eye to the reality of millions who live without a voice, without a future, and without hope. Freedom and dignity are what any true nation should offer its people.
Is North Korea criticized for restricting freedom of expression and for accusations of human rights violations? How do you justify these practices within the context of the regime? And do you believe that the international community has a distorted or fair view of the country?
Freedom of speech, as the West understands it, can be problematic. It often just creates confusion, discord, and spreads lies. North Korea needs to protect its people from internal and external enemies, and that means some things need to be controlled. Stability and peace are more important than everyone speaking their mind at any given moment. They prioritize the collective good. The world's view of North Korea is completely manipulated by countries that want to take what is ours. The international press only talks negatively but fails to show the good side, such as free education and healthcare for everyone. The regime is not hiding anything. It's simply resisting external pressure, protecting its people from being controlled by foreign powers.
This idea of protecting peace is just an excuse. The reality is that the people have no voice. Limiting freedom of speech only allows the government to hide the truth. In North Korea, anyone who dares to criticize the regime suffers terrible consequences. This is not protection, it's control, making people live in fear. True peace comes from freedom, not oppression. North Korea doesn't have peace, it has fear. The rest of the world knows what's happening there, thanks to reports from people who managed to escape. We can't stay blind to the truth just because the regime says everything is fine. They're not protecting anything. They're controlling to keep power in the hands of a small elite.
Talk about freedom of speech, but what is it when ideas are used to deceive or destroy a nation? In North Korea, they don't allow that to happen. Censorship is necessary to protect the country's stability and prevent the people from being manipulated. Instead of allowing discord, the government ensures peace and unity are preserved. Talking badly about a country just because it doesn't follow Western rules is easy. But those who truly know North Korea understand that the regime protects its people's freedom in a way no one else does. Their resistance is proof that they don't need anyone to live with dignity.
The second question is, the country experienced humanitarian crises and food shortages, and many consider the regime to be a dictatorship. In your opinion, what is the government's real responsibility in these issues? And is the popular support for the regime genuine or forced by strict control?
Food crisis and economic hardships are a direct result of an incompetent government. The regime spends billions on weapons while the people starve. If the government truly cared about the population, it would invest in food, healthcare, and infrastructure, not nuclear bombs. The people aren't supporting this government out of love, but out of fear and lack of options. The regime's control is so strong that people are afraid even to think what they want. This isn't support, it's survival. Anyone who tries to question the regime is severely punished. The support comes from fear, not genuine respect or admiration. We can't call this democracy or a popular system. People need freedom, not a dictatorship that controls everything.
Food crisis isn't the regime's fault. It's the result of sanctions imposed by other countries, which hinder trade and aid. The North Korean government has done everything it can within the limitations imposed by external hostility. It's not easy to survive when the whole world attacks you, but the country still manages to sustain its population. Popular support in North Korea is genuine. The people are united and know what's at stake. The regime doesn't do everything perfectly, but nobody does. They face many challenges, but instead of giving in to hopelessness, they resist. The true dictatorship is the one that prevents a nation from deciding its own path without being constantly attacked from the outside.
Sanctions may complicate things, but the real reason for the lack of food is poor internal management. The regime spends millions on armaments and doesn't invest in agriculture or policies that would improve people's lives. They prefer to show power than to take care of what really matters: the people. The support is not genuine, it's forced. If it were genuine, The population would have the freedom to say what they think, without fear of retaliation. In a regime that controls everything, from what people say to where they live, how can we call this genuine support? This is fear disguised as loyalty. The people need freedom, not a facade of support.
Does North Korea's regime invest heavily in its military, including nuclear arms, as a legitimate defense? Or does it escalate tensions? How does this relate to international sanctions? Or does it contribute to escalating tensions? What is the relationship between this stance and the international sanctions the country faces?
The investment in nuclear weapons is a legitimate measure of defense. North Korea has been constantly threatened by countries like the United States, which have a history of interfering in independent nations. The country needs to protect itself, and nuclear weapons guarantee that no one will attempt to invade or attack. The regime has the right to defend its sovereignty and its people. International sanctions are an attempt to weaken North Korea and undermine its self-sufficiency. Instead of helping, these sanctions only worsen the lives of the people without addressing the real issue: external hostility. The military program is necessary to ensure the nation remains safe and independent. And whoever controls the security of a country controls its destiny.
Investing in nuclear weapons only contributes to the escalation of violence and increases the risk of conflict. North Korea does not need more weapons. It needs peaceful and diplomatic solutions. This nuclear program generates fear and disdain around the world. Instead of ensuring security, it places the country in a position of isolation and attracts even more sanctions. Sanctions are a response to this aggressive behavior. The regime chose to invest in weapons of mass destruction instead of addressing the basic needs of its population, such as food and healthcare. We cannot justify a military program that only increases global tensions, putting the lives of millions of people at risk.
The truth is that North Korea has no choice but to defend itself. The West does not understand the real threat the country faces, and when it attempts to attack, the regime must ensure that the country is strong enough to resist. If North Korea had not invested in its military program, it would be much more vulnerable to external threats. What the world calls aggression is simply a reflection of the need to protect oneself. The regime has no intention of invading or attacking other countries, but instead aims to guarantee the survival of its people and state. Sanctions only serve to further harm ordinary citizens without offering any solution to the conflict.
Question 4. Is North Korea governed by the same family for several generations? In a dynastic system, can this model be seen as a way to ensure stability, or is it an example of an outdated and authoritarian regime that limits the country's development and prosperity?
Dynastic government, like North Korea's, limits any real chance of progress. In a regime where power is passed down from generation to generation, innovation is stifled, and the people are kept in a cycle of submission. It's not about stability, but about authoritarianism, where one family controls everything and everyone, without allowing for changes that could improve the lives of the population. This outdated model not only slows the country's development, but also keeps the people trapped in a dictatorship. What North Korea needs is not a family in power, but a democratic system, where the people can decide who should lead them and how the country should be governed, with freedom to express their opinions and build their future.
Kim dynasty is not just a family in power. It represents the unity and continuity of the North Korean people's struggle. This model has ensured stability as North Korea has faced numerous external threats since its founding. The continuity of leadership is seen as a strength as it keeps the country strong in the face of constant challenges. Without this stability, the country would be vulnerable to internal and external destabilization. North Korea has a unique system and does not need to follow the Western model to be successful. The stability provided by the Kim dynasty is essential for national unity. The prosperity of the country does not depend on Western governance models, but on strong leadership that defends the sovereignty and interests of the people.
Continuity of the dynastic regime is not a strength, but a weakness. By keeping power concentrated in a single family, North Korea closes the door to real renewal. The country could be thriving with a more inclusive and open government. But it remains in a state of regression, where development and freedom are stifled. Stability should not be confused with oppression. The regime does not guarantee prosperity, but control. The true strength of a nation comes from the freedom and power of its people, not from a dynasty that chooses who rules without consulting anyone. The North Korean people deserve more than to be controlled by a single family. They deserve the opportunity to decide their own fate.
Now let's move on to the closing statements. And now the one in favor of the North Korean regime begins.
North Korea is more than the criticisms it receives. It is a country that fights for its independence and the protection of its people, facing enemies who try to suffocate its sovereignty. Despite the challenges, the regime provides education and healthcare for all, ensuring a solid foundation for its people. The stability they have achieved comes from collective effort and respect for a model that prioritizes the nation, not the interests of foreign powers. The West sells an idea of freedom that only increases inequalities. North Korea shows that a united people can resist even against the greatest pressures. It is not a perfect country, but it is an example of resistance and pride. Instead of criticizing, we should look at what the regime has built despite the sanctions and adversity. It is a valuable alternative in a world dominated by exploitation and individualism.
North Korea is not resistance, it is repression. While the regime spends billions on armaments, the people face hunger and fear. The government uses words like protection and unity to mask a brutal control that strips away the freedom and basic rights of its citizens. No amount of propaganda can hide the stories of suffering told by those who have escaped. The future of a country should be built by the will of its people, not by the imposition of a regime. The true strength of a nation lies in the freedom of choice and respect for human rights. North Korea, as it is today, is not a model to follow. The North Korean people deserve a government that invests in them, in their hopes and dreams, and that values dignity above all.
That was our debate for today. I hope you all enjoyed it. I'm asking you to leave a like to support the channel. If you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Until our next debate,